This is a coin capable of destroying the world. By chance, it slipped from a passerby's hand, rolled into the sewer, then plummeted down, passing through a ventilation duct until it reached a subway station. Then, utilizing inertia, it bounced off the iron tracks below and slipped into the dark, damp pipes. As it rolled faster and faster, the terrifying underground world seemed to beckon to the camera. 100 meters, 300 meters. The coin finally, after countless spins, landed lightly on a pitch-black muddy ground. A greasy black hand picked up the coin. The worker, unable to contain his excitement, brought it closer to examine it, but before he could get too excited, the foreman behind him berated him harshly. Helpless, the man carefully stored the coin and was forced back into endless labor. It turned out that this was the world 300 meters underground. The man was a laborer here, working 16 hours a day in a dark, sunless environment. Only when the workers were completely drained of energy could they, under the supervisor's watch, march in unison to the shower room. But they only had 10 seconds to shower, and even then, they had to follow the foreman's orders. They were like parts on an assembly line, applying shampoo while heading to the dormitory. The purpose of this was to squeeze as much time as possible from the workers. Though today's dinner was still the strange-tasting rotten fish, Kaiji was somewhat happy at this moment, because after a month of hard work, he finally reached his first payday. But unlike the surface world, the wages here were not money, but a special underground currency called Bailey vouchers. Kaiji received 3,000 yuan in Bailey vouchers, which had a purchasing power equivalent to only 1/10 of their value on the surface. In other words, his actual take-home pay was only 300 bucks. After deducting food and accommodation costs, his real wage was only 135.7.
皆さん、重ね重ね言いますが、少ないなんて思っちゃいけませんよ。
It turned out that before coming here, these people had already amassed huge debts on the surface. Kaiji thought participating in a high-stakes game could repay his debts, but contrary to his fantasy, he not only failed to clear his debts but also ended up losing himself to the organizers. Kaiji was then branded as a slave, becoming a laborer here. Though his life had hit rock bottom, Kaiji calculated that with his current wages, if he worked hard for 60 years, he might still have a chance to get out. But just as he was pondering his savings plan, a man with a sly smile pushed a cart under the pretense of happy hour. Seeing the frosty beer, crispy chips, and chicken skewers, the workers immediately swarmed around. Obviously, in this underground world where there was no relaxation, having a drink after payday had become the only outlet for people. Kaiji, constantly swallowing his saliva, was no exception, but for the sake of his plan, he turned away, resisting his inner desire. The man noticed this scene, slowly approached Kaiji, and praised his determination to leave. But then he changed his tone, saying that in such a harsh environment, he shouldn't be too hard on himself after all. Everyone deserved a breather. With that, he placed a can of beer in front of Kaiji. Looking at the beer in front of him, Kaiji first chuckled foolishly, then he gently pressed the beer against his face. The beer was still ice cold, and the taste was simply exquisite. Feeling the cool foam flow slowly down his throat into his stomach, the tight grip of his desires gradually loosened. Soon, he finished the beer in one gulp. Should he have another one? After all, he still had over 100 bucks left. Just as Kaiji finally convinced himself, the man asked if he wanted some snacks. How can you enjoy drinking without some snacks? This hit Kaiji's fragile nerves again. He hadn't eaten anything greasy in a month, but these things were really expensive. Finally, after battling his soul, Kaiji chose the cheapest pack of peanuts. At this moment, every word from the man felt like a devil's temptation.
本当に食いたいのは焼き鳥だろ? これは自分へのご褒美だよ.
Causing Kaiji to slowly lose his will. In the end, he not only bought the chicken skewers but also got a bag of chips. However, within just 5 minutes, Kaiji had finished 3 cans of beer and taken the last bite of chicken. It wasn't until the next day, back at the dust-filled construction site, that Kaiji finally realized his mistake. He couldn't stop cursing himself for being such a fool. Not only had he failed his plan right after making it, but he also spent his entire month's hard-earned wages in just an hour. At that moment, a violent explosion occurred at the site. When Kaiji came to his senses, he found that Koji, who had always taken care of him, was injured in the blast. He immediately carried Koji to the infirmary. He thought there would be hope here, but as soon as he relaxed, he realized it was already overcrowded. Kaiji initially thought it was a problem with the doctors, but the truth was that their pitiful wages couldn't cover the medical expenses. Without payment, The doctors could only leave them lying there indefinitely. Even if you try not to get sick, working on a dust-filled site for months would eventually lead to lung disease, landing you here. So, saving money here was pointless. From the initial hopeful cruise to the food temptations pushed out during payday, everything was designed to trap them here, providing free labor for the upper management. In other words, there was never a day when they could leave. Surprisingly, upon hearing this, a doctor pointed casually, saying there was indeed a way out if they dared. The path of the brave, that's right. This was the only way out. The last resort for those who realized they could never repay their debts. If they completed it, they could return to the surface and regain their freedom. Hearing this, Kaiji and a few others immediately decided to sign up, but they didn't realize they were about to embark on a path with a 100% mortality rate.
ということは地上に出られる。今度は上がってる。エレベーターか。
When the elevator opened again, their handcuffs and blindfolds were removed. The first thing that caught their eyes was the hundreds of meters of altitude, and their stage was the adjacent steel track. The track connected two skyscrapers, appearing thin and long in the air. This was what the underground world called the Path of the Brave. As long as they crossed this 30-meter-long balance beam, they could not only regain their freedom but also win a huge prize of $10 million. Relax. It's just a longer balance beam. Everyone here, aren't you all dropouts, non-productive, lacking endurance, always escaping problems, and living lazily day by day? How could people like you deserve $10 million? If you want to get a lot of money without any effort in a short time, then you have to bet your life on it. Hearing these words made the crowd even more agitated. They said they were just poor, not stupid, and that it was impossible to cross the bridge. It was far too dangerous. Hearing this, everyone turned to look at Kaiji. However, Kaiji declared that he would definitely win this time. Seeing the first participants step forward, the others began to think calmly. Since there was no hope, they might as well take this one final gamble.
そうだ。鉄骨に手をついて渡るなどという無様な姿をお客様方に見せないためにだ。
It turned out that, besides them and the staff, there was a third group of people. Under the surveillance cameras, the contestants' hesitation, cowardice, and helplessness were all being watched by the rich people hidden in the opposite building. As the first person stepped shakily onto the steel track, the others also carefully started to move towards the other side. Even though they kept telling themselves that as long as they followed the line on their shoes, they wouldn't fall. The wind slowly picking up and the extreme fear of looking down still tormented everyone's fragile nerves. Worse still, lightning began to sporadically flash in the distant clouds. It couldn't possibly rain, could it? If it rained now, it would mean certain death for them.
雨なんか平気だ。風が吹いてるわけじゃない。
Just as Kaiji finished speaking, a man immediately felt the wind growing stronger. He gradually began to lose his balance, realizing that his words had affected others' psyches. Kaiji quickly reassured them that it was all just an illusion, but it was too late. They could only watch as the man fell onto the electrified steel track and then plummeted into the abyss. With such a precedent, everyone's eyes were now filled with complete terror, and this state of fear was exactly what the VIPs in the opposite building wanted to see. Before they could recover from witnessing someone's death, they were drawn to the approaching storm clouds. At this point, a man with a weaker mind began to pray, hoping that God would help steady his trembling legs. Unexpectedly, this act of shifting his attention almost caused him to fall. With the second person's death, the remaining contestants began to panic. Some people were so scared they fell on their own, while others tried to turn back, colliding with the people behind them and plummeting into the abyss together. Watching this gruesome scene, the businessmen occasionally erupted into applause, as if they were watching an intense sports game rather than a matter of life and death. Worse still, the sky opened up and heavy rain began to fall. The rain continued to fall on the three remaining men. To suppress his fear, Makoto could only pound his legs to try and stay as calm as possible. At this moment, Koji called out to Kaiji from behind. He said he couldn't hold on much longer. Every time he thought of those who had fallen, his legs would tremble uncontrollably. If it weren't for Kaiji, he would never have made it this far. With that, Koji pulled out the 10 million Bailey voucher. He hoped Kaiji could cash it and use the money to get treatment for his daughter. He had never provided his daughter with a prosperous life and had even burdened her with debt. It was all his fault. Koji hoped this money could change his daughter's life. Looking at the empty track ahead, Kaiji realized that Koji had already fallen, but the timid Koji, to avoid alarming Kaiji, had quietly plummeted into the abyss without making a sound. Reflecting on his time with Koji, the devastated Kaiji couldn't help but scream in anguish, but he quickly forced himself to calm down, because, even if it was just to fulfill Koji's wish, he had to reach the other side. Without any further distractions, Kaiji and the surviving Makoto encouraged each other, quickly closing the remaining distance. However, their safe arrival was not what the businessman wanted to see. So, as Makoto opened the window in front of him, the pressure difference blew him off the building. Although regretful, Kaiji didn't have time to mourn because he still had to cash in Koji's voucher.
いや君に渡す金は賞金の1000万から借金の924万6800円を差し引いた75万3200円だ。75万！でもこのおっさんのチケットはな！バカか！死んだ者のチケットなど知るか？
Sitting on the ground, Kaiji was momentarily speechless, only managing to struggle to his feet and curse their despicable actions. How could he explain this to his deceased friend, just as the overseer Yukio was impatiently ordering for Kaiji to be taken away? Kazutaka unexpectedly exploded in anger, saying that Kaiji could be given another chance. As long as Kaiji can still win, he will not only fulfill his friend's last wish but also take home 10 times the 10 million yen prize. A whopping 100 million yen. If he lost, Kaiji would only have to return underground. Facing this nearly sadistic gamble, Kaiji, in his dire situation, couldn't refuse. The more impossible the odds, the more his potential could be unleashed. The game's rules were simple. Each side would have 5 cards, 1 emperor and 4 citizens on one side, and 1 slave and 4 citizens on the other. The side with the slave card would play first. Citizen versus citizen was a tie, but a citizen could beat a slave, the emperor could beat a citizen, and the slave, due to oppression, could beat the emperor, because the emperor's deck had a significant advantage and only needed to avoid the slave to win. The disadvantaged slave side had the right to multiply the prize by 10. To honor his promise to Koji, Kaiji had to take the slave deck. Soon, the match began, and initially, both played cautiously, but after 2 citizen clashes, the probability of the slave defeating the emperor rose to 1/3. Fearing the emperor would clash with his citizen, Kaiji played his slave card on the 3rd round. However, Kaiji's nervous expression was easily read by Yukio, who immediately revealed a citizen card, crushing Kaiji's hopes.
やはり哀れだな奴隷は。
あっさり負けてくれるじゃないの。
Yukio had noticed that Kaiji's body would unconsciously lean forward whenever he was about to play the slave card. This unaware gesture caused Kaiji to lose all his winnings. Now, Kaiji was facing the prospect of returning to the dark, sunless underground for 130 years of labor to repay his debt. As Kaiji was about to be taken away, he noticed how Yukio wore his watch with the face on the inside of his wrist, a style usually favored by women. Kaiji recalled that Yukio hadn't looked at his face during the game but had stared intently under the table the exact angle where the watch face would be. This realization made Kaiji suspect something, because that watch was different from the one Yukio had worn before. Remembering the chip embedded in his arm that could detect heartbeats, Kaiji quickly feigned needing to use the restroom to speak with his guard. Rinko! Kaiji knew Rinko and Yukio had been colleagues, but after Yukio's promotion, he always overshadowed Rinko. Now, Kaiji offered Rinko a chance to turn the tables, asking for some capital to continue. When the scene shifted back indoors, Kaiji was revived with a capital of 50 million. Ignoring Yukio, Kaiji slowly approached a mirror and mocked himself for indeed looking like an idiot. No wonder he always failed. With that, Kaiji smashed his head against the mirror. Kaiji knew that bleeding would destabilize his heart rate, rendering Yukio's watch useless. Returning to the table, Kaiji secretly hid 3 citizen cards under his leg while Kazutaka was still talking. He then placed the remaining citizen and slave cards face down on the table, accusing Yukio of cheating. Blood from his head accidentally dripped on the back of the cards, and Kaiji quickly wiped it off with a towel. The second round began shortly after. Without the aid of his watch, Yukio could only keep playing citizen cards to play it safe, but when he was about to play the 3rd card, he noticed the blood stain on the corner of Kaiji's card. Considering what he had seen earlier, if the blood hadn't been wiped off completely, there was a 50% chance that the card was the slave. Not wanting to take any risks, Yukio played another citizen card. However, the result was still a draw. Even so, it didn't matter. If the bloodstained card was a citizen, then the next bloodstained card would definitely be the slave. He just needed to play another citizen card to win. At this point, Kaiji laid down another bloodstained card. Seeing this, Yukio immediately picked up his last citizen card, intending to put an end to Kaiji's game once and for all. But before placing his card, Yukio hesitated. He suddenly remembered that Kaiji had made a card-switching move earlier, and that card had been the slave. Could it be that both blood-stained cards were citizens, meant to lure him into using all his citizens? He couldn't be that naive. So, Yukio immediately picked up his Emperor card and slammed it on the table.
惜しいな、カイジ。貴様の持った毒は漏れた。俺さ、蛇でいてくれぜ。
It turned out this was all part of Kaiji's ruse. He knew Yukio's suspicious nature and had expected him to notice the card-switching move. So, Kaiji took advantage of this. He deliberately picked up the card from under his leg and made a show of it on the table. The cards left on the table were still the citizen and the slave, with the Emperor crushed by the slave. Yukio, who tried to win back, had all his assets confiscated by Kazutaka and was thrown into the underground world. Kaiji not only turned 50 million into 5 billion but also fulfilled his promise to his friend. After delivering the money to Koji's daughter, he gave half to Rinko as agreed. However, Koji didn't anticipate that Rinko had drugged his drink. When Koji woke up, the money and Rinko were both gone. Opening the letter Rinko left behind, Koji discovered that the loan contract had an interest rate compounded every minute. He had borrowed 50 million for 68 minutes, with the interest amounting to 2 billion. After subtracting the half he originally agreed to give Rinko, Koji was left with only 430,000. This 430,000, along with Koji's crumpled voucher, was sent to his daughter. Just like the beginning of the movie, Kaiji was back to being a debtor of 10 million. A few days later, Kaiji was once again captured and taken underground, but the real twist was just beginning. Kaiji was shocked to find that all the slaves in his group had pooled their hard-earned money and given it to him, because with 500,000, he could buy a day of freedom on the surface. They pinned their hopes on Kaiji. They wanted Kaiji to go outside for 2 weeks. If Kaiji could earn 2 billion in those 2 weeks, they could all repay their debts and return to the surface. Thus, carrying their heavy hopes, Kaiji gained a brief moment of freedom. The truly exciting and thrilling gamble was about to begin. These glittering marbles are worth 4,000 yen each. If you dare to bring some capital and sit here, you have a chance to exchange them for money and take it all away. Currently, the marbles have accumulated to 13 levels, with each level valued at around 100 million yen. No poor person can resist the temptation of seeing this intoxicating 3 billion yen in cash. Thus, on payday, a large number of participants gather here, and the rules of the game are simple. Just exchange your capital for marbles, then press the button beside you to let them all cascade down. If the marbles manage to pass through the steel forest of nails, they will fall into the funnel below. There are 3 such funnels, each with a red hole. In other words, if a marble successfully falls into the red hole on the last level, you can change your fate, just like the 2 previous winners who went on to live a wealthy life. Listening to the audience's jeers around him, Kaiji knows this machine is far from as simple as Sakazaki claimed, but the man standing above doesn't think so. He firmly believes that one more try, just one more try, will definitely lead to victory. Thinking this, he hurriedly pushes through the crowd and pulls up the credit card that was stuffed into his pocket when he entered the casino. He almost reached the 3rd level earlier. If luck wasn't on his side, he wouldn't have gotten that far. Just borrow a little, and repay both the principal and interest later. As it turns out, anyone under 50 is given a credit card when they enter the casino, and the borrowed money only needs to be repaid before closing to avoid any trouble. If they lose everything again and can't repay, they'll be branded as slaves and taken to the underground worksite 300 meters below, where they'll have to repay their debt through labor. Didn't they give you one too? Before Kaiji can think of a response, he is distracted by the amount disappearing from the machine. Seeing the borrowed 10 million disappear as well, the man on stage tries to sneak away, but suddenly a group of security guards rushes in and forcibly takes him away. When they came out of the casino, Kaiji, having seen through everything, advises Sakazaki. He says the 2 people on the wall are the casino chairman and a high-level executive. Their winning performances are just a front to deplete the prize pool. There is no way this game can be won.
逆に言うたら出す方法もあるっちゅうことやな。
Seeing an identical machine, before Kaiji can recover from his shock, Sakazaki declares that this is the only path left in his life. It turns out that Sakazaki was laid off by his company a few years ago, and as a result, His wife and daughter abandoned him. Since that day, Sakazaki has been constantly reflecting on his problems, ultimately attributing all of it to poverty, and he observes the gaming machines every day. Sakazaki believes that if he had 13 billion, his family would come back to him, and he has already figured out how to beat the gaming machine. Now, he just needs a smart assistant to take action, and he won't let Kaiji work for free. Sakazaki then offers a reward of 20 million, considering his own penniless situation and Sakazaki's confident demeanor. Kaiji has no reason to refuse. Seeing Kaiji agree, Sakazaki calls out his inside contact in the casino. This person is none other than Koji's daughter, Yumi. Yumi infiltrated the casino to find a chance for revenge. Yumi can help them bypass the security check at the entrance and also knows exactly which days the casino has higher odds. To prevent people from being discouraged by the gaming machine and not wanting to play again, they widen the gap in the steel forest on the 20th of every month. Next are the 3 death roulettes. From Sakazaki's daily observations, it's clear there is some mechanism that always makes the marbles change direction at the last moment before entering the hole. But Sakazaki says he has a way. He used his hand to push through the air, remarkably guiding the off-track marble back on course. It turns out he has a magnet hidden in his hand. Sakazaki plans to place the magnet inside an empty beer can on the day of the plan, then have Kaiji enter the casino. Sakazaki will then make a high-profile announcement that he is going to challenge the gaming machine. Attracting a large crowd, Sakazaki will open a regular can of beer. Kaiji needs to obtain the beer with the magnet from Yumi, and when the atmosphere reaches a certain point, Kaiji will blend into the crowd and switch the 2 cans of beer. Thus, the plan is complete. Sakazaki took the beer can with the magnet in it and pushed it so hard that the marble really changed direction. However, in the next second, they slide into the black hole again. Seeing this, Sakazaki's vision goes black, and he falls off the platform, dropping the beer can into the prize pool. The organizers quickly notice something wrong, but when Seiya picks up the can, no marbles are sticking to it. What's wrong with this beer? He asks. It turns out that to prevent cheating, the organizers change the material of the marbles every other day. Today, by coincidence, they used brass, which was Yumi's idea. Hearing this, Kaiji is bewildered, not understanding why Yumi would help her enemy.
全然ダメ。彼らを殺したのはあなただ。はあ？あなたは落ちていった人間たちを踏み台にしたんだ。そうやってあの鉄骨を生き残った。
違う、俺はあの時。
Apparently, Yumi has already been deceived by the Tai group, which is why she leaked their plan completely. Although Sakazaki's 20 million principal turned into worthless paper, Seiya suddenly shows mercy and invites him to join a new game. If Sakazaki wins, he can get 30 million in prize money and challenge again. Otherwise, he will be caught as a cheater and taken underground to live in perpetual darkness, rather than giving a real choice. Seiya's tone feels more like a threat. Thus, with no other choice, Kaiji and Sakazaki reluctantly took the elevator to a new venue. First, they saw a beautiful woman locked in a cage, with 2 lions on either side of her. Once everything was ready, the woman's boyfriend was brought to the center, chained up. This man was the same one who had gambled heavily before, but now his debt had accumulated to 30 million. The game rules were simple. There were 3 buttons in front of the man, each corresponding to one of the 2 lions and his girlfriend. If he presses the correct button, not only will he and his girlfriend gain their freedom, but he will also receive 30 million yen in cash, allowing him to pay off his previous debts. At first glance it sounds like a bargain, but there are actually rules behind it. Inside the girlfriend's cage was a screen displaying the correct number. If she told him the number, they could both get out. However, if she didn't want to be with him anymore, she could choose to sacrifice him and take the 30 million cash for herself.
私、カズくんさえいてくれればお金なんていらないよ。
さあ、教えてくれ。何番だ。
1番よ。
The audience, moved by their love, stood up and applauded enthusiastically. After the lions had their feast, the woman earned a hefty reward at the cost of her boyfriend's life. While the audience was still absorbed in the scene, Seiya called for the next participant. It was Kaiji, who had watched the entire ordeal. This is like feeding a lion. Sakazaki tried to pull Kaiji away, but Kaiji refused. Kaiji stepped into the center of the venue. As the staff raised the iron gate, the princess Kaiji had to rely on in the game emerged from the darkness. It was none other than Yumi, who had betrayed them earlier. After Kaiji's legs were chained, the host retreated into another cage. The game officially began, but before Yumi could speak, the host shouted again, telling Kaiji that the number was 2. Kaiji, bewildered, moved closer and realized it was Fune, the man he had played cards with before. Fune explained that ever since he was taken underground, he had harbored a deep hatred for the Tai group. Even if it was just once, he hoped Kaiji would trust him and show Tai a lesson.
Kaiji 3番
Since they're both saying it, it must be 1. Kaiji was completely bewildered. Who should he trust now? Just as his mind was in turmoil, a familiar voice echoed beside him. When Kaiji looked closely, he realized it was Yukio, who had previously lost miserably to him. It turned out that because he disgraced the Tai group, Yukio was thrown underground by Kazutaka after incurring debt and was now working as the game's gatekeeper.
覚悟を決めてさっさとボタンを押してしまえ。1に勇気、2に度胸、3に覚悟だ。
Upon hearing this, Kaiji understood everything and approached the buttons without hesitation, pressing number 3. As the iron cage slowly opened, Yumi stood before Kaiji. Seiya, a master of psychological games, believed that since Yumi had betrayed Kaiji before, Kaiji would never trust her again, but Seiya didn't anticipate that. With Yukio's reminder, Kaiji would find a way out of the predicament. After being demoted from a high position within the group, Yukio was bullied by small-time characters like Seiya. Yukio helped Kaiji solely for the purpose of getting revenge on Seiya. Together with what he just experienced, Yukio joins Kaiji's squad and he has plans of his own. Yukio lifted a wooden board, revealing a hidden pit, saying that this would bring down the casino. The scene then shifted to Yumi, who had been cast aside by the casino. Seeing Yumi's pitiable state, Kaiji and Sakazaki decided to accept her into their group. Only Yukio feared she would betray them again. Yumi, aware of this, volunteered to handle cooking and cleaning, promising to leave when crucial plans were discussed. Time quickly passed, and a few days later, they returned to the casino, ready to conquer the gaming machine. As Kaiji, seated on the high platform, pressed the button, a large number of marbles indeed passed through the steel forest and landed on the discs below. Even the staff were puzzled, as today's difficulty level was set to C. Yet the marbles were passing through easily. Seiya appeared, immediately accusing them of cheating and declaring that all their funds would be confiscated. Yes, it was Yumi again. Yumi had placed a listening device in the vase, allowing Seiya to learn of Kaiji's plan to disguise as a moving company and swap the marbles for smaller ones. The betrayal shattered Kaiji and his team. Was this the end? To convince everyone present, Seiya took out a template to measure the size of the marbles on the spot. To his surprise, none of the marbles fell out. Seiya rushed to his office and grabbed a ruler from the drawer to compare. It turned out the marbles hadn't been swapped. The tool Seiya used to adjust the gap between the nails had been switched. Yukio's pit was directly above Seiya's office. It took 2 years to dig, allowing Yukio to secretly switch the tool with a magnet when Seiya was careless. Even if Seiya figured out everything, he couldn't accuse them of cheating, because he had adjusted the gaps himself. Kaiji had long known the secret of the roulette. The marbles always fell at the hole's edge because the roulette was tilted. This tilt caused the marbles to repeatedly change direction. To avoid detection, they distributed this angle between the roulette machine and the floor below. Kaiji discovered this because, during the first time Sakazaki used the magnet, Seiya hurriedly picked up the rolling marble. Based on the soft soil below, they filled a simple pool with a large amount of water, relying on the weight to forcibly level the tilt. Realizing this, Seiya panicked a bit. He turned around and took out a remote control, intending to adjust the original forward angle to the back. Although this would increase the probability of entering the third layer, the chances of the first 2 layers would decrease due to the tilt.
切り札持ってこい。それはあまりに露骨すぎて使えないと。持ってこい。
Had Lady Luck abandoned him again? Shouldn't it have gone in? While Kaiji was trying to figure it out, he suddenly noticed the empty pipe below the machine. Before Kaiji could understand what the noise was, Seiya's mocking laughter flooded in.
残念だったな。残念だったじゃねえ。要は金だ。待ってろ。
After saying this, Kaiji called Sakazaki and Yukio aside. It turned out that this time he had thought of a surefire way to defeat the machine. All they needed was enough money to completely overwhelm it. Kaiji takes out his own savings, and Sakazaki, infected, also takes out all his money. But Yukio, already burdened with 40 million in debt, was terrified. He didn't dare to continue gambling and even suggested quitting. Helpless, Kaiji could only return to the platform with what little money they had.
たった300万でどうするつもりですか。この勝負私の勝ちだ。
そうとは限らねえ。弾が溢れてる。外れ穴が埋まってるぞ。
Kaiji was confident because he had seen through Seiya's tricks, although tilting the machine backward would indeed increase the difficulty. The marbles that should have fallen into the prize pool were stuck in the pipe, starting to block the elimination hole. This was why they could hear the sound of marbles but couldn't see any coming out. In other words, if enough marbles accumulated in the pipe, eventually one would be forced into the red hole. Seeing this, Sakazaki's hope reignited, and the surrounding audience began to get excited as well, with more and more marbles filling the disc. The screen showed only 61 marbles remaining. This was their last chance, but because they didn't have enough money, they didn't have enough marbles. Even knowing the method, they couldn't sustain it until victory. With only 61 marbles left, the odds of success were too slim, and Kaiji didn't dare to gamble anymore. Seiya, why don't you buy the remaining marbles for 200 million? That way, I can avoid losses and you can get out in one piece. What kind of move is this? But it didn't matter. Due to Seiya's arrogance, it was clear he wouldn't agree to such a proposal. He told Kaiji to use up the last 61 marbles quickly and then immediately return to the underground world. With that, Seiya ordered the security to bring Kaiji back onto the platform. Everyone in the casino was stunned as large amounts of cash fell from the sky. In the distance, someone seemed to have gone mad, continuously throwing cash into the air. It was Yukio, originally intending to escape. Yukio found he only had 120 yuan when he tried to take the bus, but that didn't matter because he still had the credit card issued by the Tai Group. He would use the 10 million on the credit card to make a final stand. Kaiji didn't waste any time. He immediately threw all the money in. Meanwhile, Seiya collapsed in his chair. Was he going to be thrown underground by the chairman too? The scene shifted, and the second layer of the 3 roulettes was already filled with marbles. With the machine tilted backward, the third layer should easily drop marbles into the red hole. Finally, they were catching up, but then the machine's final trick activated. Seeing the constantly spewing gas from the hole, Kaiji and his team started to panic. Not only them, but the crowd watching also became restless. However, none of this mattered. Kaiji had to fail. Even if people knew it was rigged, they wouldn't be able to resist the temptation of wealth and would come back again. But Seiya didn't notice that one of the people in the crowd was looking at Kaiji with a different look in his eyes. Was he really her father's murderer? Watching their backs, Yumi couldn't help but remember her debt-ridden father. At that time, the workers not only didn't force his father to pay back the money, but also spontaneously raised money to pay for his debt. This kind of behavior seems to be the same as Kaiji's behavior now. Was it really Kaiji who pushed her father off the bridge?
お父さんは信じたの？
さあ落ちろ地獄へ。ここで攻略だ。おっちゃん助けて。おっちゃん。
使って。
What does this mean? Wait a minute. I can cancel all your debts. Give me the card. Look closely. Look carefully. One of them is the organizer who killed your father and the other one is the murderer who kicked your father off the bridge. Are you sure you want to help them?
やる。
As Kaiji took the 10 million yen loan from Yumi, everyone gathered around the gaming machine once again, eager to witness the day the casino would be defeated. Why is everyone helping him? Isn't deceiving friends and pushing the most important people off the platform necessary in a competition? I endured all the pain to get here. How can I lose to this loser in front of me? Just as the last layer was about to be filled with marbles, Seiya called out to Kaiji, I agree to your earlier proposal. I'll guarantee your freedom and give you 300 million in cash. You just need to abandon them, leave them behind, and you can enjoy the wealth alone. After all, you were just using them. Now you can show your true colors.
かわいそうだなお前。地下で希望を託してくれたイーハンのみんな、地上で俺助けてくれたこいつら、どんな財産よりも価値がある。どんな大金よりもだ。みんながいるから突破できる。たとえこの難攻不落の沼でもだ。
The Tai group's higher-ups saw this through the surveillance and immediately ordered the defeated Seiya to be arrested and sent to the underground labor camp for 135 years. On the other hand, Kaiji and his team happily split 3 billion yen in cash, but as they were about to leave, Yukio called out to Kaiji. He still felt unsatisfied with their last match and wanted to challenge Kaiji again. However, midway through their rematch, the car suddenly caught fire, forcing them to get out quickly. Unfortunately, their money was burned to ashes on the spot. Kaiji, who narrowly escaped death, could never have imagined that the money had already been swapped out by Yukio. To determine who was the wealthiest person in Japan, two top tycoons decide to place a grand bet. After converting all their assets into gold bars, they carefully place the bars on a gigantic scale with the help of staff. According to the rules posted on the wall, the winner will take all of the loser's assets, while the loser will lose everything. With the signing of the agreement, real estate mogul Togo is the first to display his immense wealth, quickly filling the scale with 50 billion yen worth of gold bars. But opposite him, Kurosaki only brings out 40 billion yen. Thus, with a 10 billion yen gap, the game officially enters the first round of Friends Assistance. At this point, Kurosaki's friends arrive at the venue carrying large amounts of cash. Due to the rules, they too convert the cash into gold bars, but compared to Kurosaki's continuous stream of support, Togo's side is much bleaker, with only 2 people showing up and contributing just a couple of the smallest gold bars. When the camera returns to Kurosaki, he has already added many large gold bricks. Just as everyone marvels at Kurosaki rapidly closing the gap, Togo's close friend suddenly appears at the door, excitedly holding up an antique. Judging by Togo's expression, it seems to be extremely valuable. However, upon the staff's evaluation, the screen shows 0. It turns out the antique has never been traded on the market and thus its value cannot be determined. Seeing this, Kurosaki mocks that it must be illegally obtained, but Togo remains calm in the face of this situation, as he waits for his billionaire partner to arrive. Fortunately, his partner does not disappoint. Seeing dozens of large gold bars follow in, Togo's excitement is palpable. After explaining everything, the partner turns and joins Kurosaki's team. Clearly, the brother Togo mentioned has betrayed him at the last minute. As the crowd looks on in confusion, Kurosaki explains that he had long held dirt on Togo's partner and used it as leverage to successfully recruit him. Watching his supposed ally walk out while apologizing, the once confident Togo appears as though his soul has been sucked out. But the game gives Togo no time to recover. As a cloud of steam slowly spreads through the venue, the contest reaches a breathless weighing phase. With both tycoons in place, the massive scale begins to sway and then visibly balances out. When it finally stops, they discover that Togo, who originally had a 10 billion yen advantage, has only narrowly won. At this moment, the competition enters the second phase, assistance from family members. Once again, it's Kurosaki's family that steps forward first. To everyone's surprise, the previously single Kurosaki now has a wife. The woman is the daughter of a real estate tycoon, and she brings 11 billion yen to support Kurosaki. Meanwhile, Togo's younger brother strides into the venue, presenting a land deed valued at 5 billion yen. Although he's starting to fall behind, Togo sees a glimmer of hope, but the appraisal team deals him another blow. The land his brother claims is worth 5 billion yen is appraised as equivalent to just 1 small gold bar. Are you kidding me? Do you not understand the value of this land? Kurosaki then clears up the confusion. Ordinarily, the land should indeed be worth 5 billion yen, but 3 days ago a developer decided to build a landfill nearby, drastically devaluing the property. And this real estate developer is no other than Kurosaki's wife's father. Togo has fallen behind in terms of capital. The only remaining chance for a comeback lies with Togo's wife, who has been missing for years. It's said that Togo once gifted her a valuable painting. If she appears, the outcome of this contest could still be uncertain. Just then, a man casually walks into the venue. It's Togo's secretary, Hirose. It turns out that Hirose is the child of Togo and his wife. Hirose has always resented Togo for abandoning them, as his mother passed away shortly after giving birth to him. Hirose approached Togo with the sole intention of waiting for an opportunity for revenge. After confirming the painting's authenticity, Hirose joins Kurosaki's side. As the painting is sent for appraisal, Kurosaki seizes the moment to mock Togo. saying that he truly is abandoned by everyone, regardless of whether the painting is of Van Gogh or Da Vinci. It's sure to add at least 10 billion yen to Kurosaki's assets, but when the staff returns, they declare that the painting is worthless, with only the frame being appraised at half a gold coin. Togo remains silent in response. It turns out Togo has always deeply loved his wife, and the painting was a gift during her pregnancy. However, she left him without explanation. He spent half his life searching for her to no avail, so he lied about the painting's origin and offered to buy it for 10 billion yen, hoping to lure her and their son out. Hearing this, Hirose falls silent, but Kurosaki, on the other hand, becomes furious, unable to accept that the painting only yielded half a gold coin. At this, Hirose remorsefully throws the half-gold coin onto Togo's tray. This round of competition ends. The game moves to the weighing phase, with both men stepping onto the scales. It doesn't take long before the pointer shifts steadily towards Kurosaki's side. It's clear that he has not only overtaken but also opened up a significant lead. Togo's assets stand at 50 yen, 1 billion, while Kurosaki's have soared to 60 billion yen. The competition reaches its final stage, where the audience can freely support either side. If the supported side wins, the participants will double their assets. Hearing this, the audience rushes into the venue, frantically throwing their stakes onto Kurosaki's tray. Seeing the cold and quiet scene on Togo's side, Kaiji realizes that the gap will only widen, so he steps up to take a risky gamble for Togo. With permission granted, Kaiji immediately calls his companions to bring out the 1 billion yen he had Togo set aside before the game started. Although this amount is nothing compared to the 10 billion yen gap, there's still a chance to turn the tables if he dares to stake his life. Saying this, Kaiji walks out of the venue with the cash, deciding to engage in a higher stakes game. The rules here are simple. Choose one of 10 ropes to bungee jump from, win, and take home 10 times the return. If you lose, you will be impaled on the spot by the spikes below. After familiarizing himself with the rules, Kaiji doesn't hesitate to bet all his cash. As he carefully selects the wooden stakes, the staff backstage urges him to hurry. At this moment, Kanako suddenly rushes into the venue, seemingly shouting something at Kaiji. Though he can't hear clearly, Kaiji deduces from her mouth movements that she's saying either 10 or 9. While he contemplates, the game time runs out. Seeing Kaiji settle on number 10, the staff backstage reveal sly smiles. They quickly notify Kurosaki at the other venue, informing him that Kaiji ultimately chose the wrong number, 10. Hearing this news, Kurosaki finally relaxes. It's now time for the final weighing. Confident of victory, Kurosaki starts celebrating early, while Togo collapses in exhaustion on the floor. In the midst of the commotion, Kaiji returns to the scene. At this moment, not only is he alive, but he also brings back a full 10 billion yen in cash. It turns out Kaiji had anticipated Kurosaki's obstruction. To increase his chances of winning, he had Hirose sabotage the reset button of the bungee jumping game in advance. This way, the winning number would be the same as the previous game's result. All that was left was to send a companion to the trash bin to find the number bet by the audience. It was clear that the missing number would be the one the audience had taken to claim their prize, although it was too high to determine if it was 10 or 9 at the time. Kanako managed to signal Kaiji while being escorted out. So, with only 1 second remaining, Kaiji switched from number 10 to number 9. Sure enough, Kaiji's efforts paid off, turning 1 billion yen into 10 billion yen. Hearing this, Kurosaki retorts, "So what?" He then pulls Kaiji towards the clock in front of them. He claims that the weighing time has already ended, so bringing back the money won't change the result. The audience checks their watches, and indeed, as Kaiji said, there are still 5 minutes left. Kaiji had anticipated that Kurosaki would use underhanded tactics, so he arranged for an undercover agent to reset the clock in the arena before the game started. Not only did this allow Kurosaki to let his guard down, but it also prevented him from raising more money while he was away. Although Kaiji had bought himself 5 precious minutes, the weight disparity was so great that Togo's side couldn't lower enough for Kaiji to place the gold bars. Seeing this, Kurosaki still felt confident of his victory. However, Kaiji called for his companions once more. Drones flew into the venue, and gold bars were slowly dropped onto Togo's scale. With Togo's stack of chips growing, Kurosaki can only urge the audience to support him again. This time, no one responded. Instead, a man tossed his gold coin onto Togo's tray, and the crowd followed suit. At this moment, they not only abandoned their previous stance but also threw all their remaining money onto Togo's side. After a frenzy of cheering, the game reached the final weighing phase. Since Togo had collapsed earlier, Kaiji stepped onto the scale in his place. After accounting for the weight difference, the scale began to sway amid gasps from the audience. Watching the unsteady pointer, both men grew increasingly tense. When the scale finally stabilized, the pointer leaned slightly towards Kurosaki, but just as the host was about to announce the result, the hand on the wall reached the next minute. A coin that had landed on the pointer slipped off and fell into Togo's tray, causing the scale to move again. Seeing his side of the scale rising, Kurosaki immediately questioned the rules. Kaiji then pointed out that the rules stated all contributions within the time limit should count. When the needle stopped again, the result of the bet was finally revealed. Clearly, Kaiji had won the game by a narrow margin. Kurosaki stood in stunned silence at the result, while the audience celebrated. Kaiji slowly picked up the half-gold coin from the tray. It was clear that Hirose's contribution had tipped the balance in their favor, securing the victory. With the game over, it was time to distribute the winnings. After everyone took their share, there were 2 boxes left, one large and one small. Kanako let Kaiji choose first. Kaiji takes the biggest box. Kaiji arrives at the tavern ready to relax when the clerk mistakes him for a freeloader. While the server was fetching Kaiji a beer, he excitedly opened the box in front of him. Finding it filled with bottled water, Kaiji realized he had been tricked again. With his meal already ordered, he decided to drink his fill before worrying about it.